Trouble. That's all I smell is trouble. Sugar, Mr. Crimble?
3, please.
I mean, we've enough with these decorators without the adjournment of this case before it begins.
The last time we had to send out for jurors was May 1942.
Well, I wouldn't argue. Morning, Pat.
They pulled a woman in off the street.
You could have put that better, couldn't you?
Oh, she wasn't best pleased, I can tell you. Missed a tin of apricots at the co-op. And she was sat over there. See, there she was. A prejudiced juror if ever I saw one. Well, I mean, no apricots. Guilty. Well, a frame of mind bent on revenge and never mind the legal niceties.
Who are us? But you mark my words, we'll be tiptoeing around one blue-blooded whim after another.
The judge has adjourned the court because the defendant, through his counsel, has challenged so many jurors that the jury panel has been exhausted, and the judge has had to send court officers out into the street to bring in passers-by. As in all other trials, the jury has been selected from members of the public whose names appeared on the electoral register and who are eligible for jury service. Mr. Dorney appears for the prosecution and Mr. Crawford White for the defence. Mr. Justice Craig presides in the case of the Queen against Fortescue.
I remind you, members of the jury, that the charge against the defendant is one of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Now, what the prosecution says is that on the evening of the 17th of September 1976, Mr. Jasper Fortescue stabbed Vice Admiral Sir Harold Dupuis with a dagger. Now, I must tell you that the standard of proof in a criminal case is proof beyond all reasonable doubt, and that the burden of proof rests with the prosecution. And now I shall call the evidence before you. Call Sir Harold Dupuis.
Call Sir Harold Dupuis.
Sir Harold is 62 years old, a mason, secretary of the Conservative Club, master of the foxhounds, and a keen fisherman and shot.
Nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Sir Harold, what is your full name?
Plain Harold Dupuis. No extra names needed in my family, I'm glad to say.
Just answer the question, Sir Harold.
Excuse my lord, I'm only here to assist justice.
Very right and proper attitude, if I may say so. And where do you live?
Oak Lodge in the village of St. Jude.
That is next door to the defendant's estate.
Quite correct. Families have been in juxtaposition since good King Henry VIII.
And what are the terms on which you live with the defendant?
Heaven forbid live with him. Bad enough over the wall, so to speak. Fact is, things have gone from bad to worse, from non-speakers to this little lot.
I see. Now, would you please tell the court, Sir Harold, what happened on the evening of the 17th of September, 1976?
Most certainly. Let me see. Let's get it straight. It all started when I was checking my hunter with the news. Wireless, of course, don't hold with the television. Those fumes and rays coming out. I was reading an article in the Telegraph one day.
Just the facts, if you would be so good, Sir Harold.
Report like a rating on the bridge, eh, sir? Where was I?
Checking your watch with the news.
Oh, yes, of course, my hunter. Exhibit number 1.
It is for Mr. Dorney to decide whether anything should be exhibited, Sir Harold.
Oh,
and I'm sure he can make that decision without any suggestions from you.
Quite so. Where was I?
Checking your hunter.
Oh, yes, of course, with the 6 o'clock news. When I noticed some honey on the face. Couldn't see a damn thing. So I rummaged around for my chamois, couldn't find it, went into the hall and saw the newspaper. Daily Telegraph, of course. And the other one.
The Times.
Just so.
And why are your papers delivered at such a late hour?
Well, my lord, we're off the beaten track. Can't stand those contraptions with combustion engines belching forth. So, the paper shop's assistant delivers the letter, the paper on his way home.
I see, thank you.
You see the papers?
Yes, indeed I do. I read it as usual, the Telegraph, of course, and then
The Times?
Yes, just so. When I see this letter, most outrageous, quisling propaganda. The most disgraceful, threatening stuff I've ever read in all my born days.
And who wrote this letter?
Him, of course.
The defendant.
Just so. And in the dock as well as he might be.
My lord, we do have copies of this letter. Paragraph 2. Gibraltar is the boil on the body politic of Spain, suppurating and chronic. However, now that General Franco is dead, I see no good or valid reason why it should not be handed back to the country it is naturally a part of, both ethnically and geographically. Now, this is a copy of the letter you saw in the newspaper.
It is. Most disgraceful. No wonder the country's sinking like a pricked lilo.
The letter will be Exhibit 1, my lord. And when you'd finished reading this letter, Sir Harold, what did you do?
Do? What any man with pride and patriotism would do. Any honourable man. Went round to have it out with him. And it was going against the grain, I tell you. It was an outrage, an absolute outrage. The man's always been a traitor.
My lord, I must...
Sir Harold, we are not interested in any pejorative statements about the witness. All we are interested in are the facts.
Well, this is one of the facts, my lord.
No, it is not.
And, what happened then?
Might I perhaps refer to my logbook?
Your what?
Me diary, my lord, where I logs me doings.
Ah, yes. How soon after the event did you make your notes?
That very night.
But how many hours after the event?
Ah, yes, that's the point. Well, I'd just been strapped up by the sawbones and left on a trolley in the hospital corridor. Oh, damned unfair it was. I'd lost me socks. But it must have been 2 hours after Fortescue attacked me.
I see. Very well, you may use your diary.
Much obliged, my lord. Might I possibly have a glass of water?
I should explain that witnesses, not just the police, but any witness, may refresh his mind with notes about the event, provided those notes were taken within a reasonable time after the event to which they refer. And let us hope that it will expedite the witness's evidence.
Me medicine, my lord. Right. I'm proceeding at a smart pace up Fortescue's drive when I hear his voice coming from the library.
Did you hear what he was saying?
Well, not then, my lord, but the tone was unmistakable. Most unpleasantly thin, if you take my meaning. So I tiptoed to the laurels by the French windows of said library and peers through. There I espy Fortescue and me wife facing him.
Lady Dupuis.
I don't stock a harem at Oak's Lodge. One wife, many dogs. That's the order of things.
I believe you stated earlier that you were not on speaking terms with Fortescue. I gather that does not apply to your wife.
Well, as far as I knew, it did, my lord. I mean, my dear wife is allowed to come and go as she pleases. The village gubbins and the St. Jude's wildlife show and the coven.
Coven?
Well, being a lady with a heart of gold, my lord, she's much involved with nature. Most peculiar lady, not like many in the world.
You were saying that your wife was facing the accused.
Was I? Oh, yes. At this moment, I heard Fortescue pipe, "Dotty, I'll have my way. You'll see." And here's the damn nitty-gritty. In his right hand is a dagger.
May the witness be shown Exhibit 2, please.
Well, that's it. Know it anywhere by the pansy handle.
And where was your wife, Sir Harold?
You may well ask.
Well, that is what the court wants to know.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes. Well, she was there with the accused.
But where, exactly?
Fortescue was here, and my poor, misguided wife, she was brainwashed, you know, was there.
Sir Harold, it is not possible for the shorthand writer to take down your arm movements, graphic though they may be. Will you please explain their positions in words?
Well enough. Well, my wife was standing facing the French windows, warding him off with some bulrushes. Fortescue, sitting facing her, his back to me, threatening her person with the weapon. Between the two of us. How's that?
Very clearly put. Now, Sarah, would you describe the defendant's threatening position more exactly?
Etched in my memory. Fortescue was sitting with his embroidery frame on his left, you know, one of those fiddly contraptions, the dagger raised in his right hand, my poor wife holding the bulrushes in front of her belly. Now, what protection they would afford is beyond me. She's very unworldly.
And how did she look?
She was sporting a sort of night-dress, which she bought, let me see, in what's called rub-a-dub in Marrakesh.
Ramadan, I think you mean, Sir Harold. However, I was referring to her expression.
She was terrified, poor mite.
And then?
Well, I dived straight through the laurels to save her, by which time she's screaming fit to burst. I tries the windows, which don't budge, bolted or something, and no wonder. All the while, Fortescue is scrambling up like a camel, shouting most abusively, "I've warned you, set one foot in my house, and I'll defend myself." At this very moment, the window's open. So I enters, dear Dotty, shouting, "You care, you care," to me between screams, while Fortescue lingers and lunges forward, crouched for the attack. He was in a killer mood, I can tell you, and he gouges me through Harris and flesh.
Harris?
Let me tweed, sir. None of your pansy stuff. Good enough for beating with.
Beating the undergrowth for game.
Well, I don't beat women, if that's what you imply.
And how exactly were you knifed?
As I said, he lunges forward, piercing me left thigh there.
And then, what happened?
And all hell's lets loose. That's what happens. Dotty throws the bulrushes in the air. I falls to the ground at Fortescue's feet, who's hopping about, well, sort of demented, shouting something. I wasn't listening, too busy with my leg. And at this very moment, Constable Simpson appears. Pop! Like a genie out of a bottle.
My lord, Police Constable Simpson had just entered the defendant's main gate when he heard Lady Dupuis' screams.
Most fortuitous.
Well, it would have been settled with fisticuffs and all over if he hadn't poked his nose in.
If I might explain, my lord.
I would be most grateful.
Apparently, the Fortescue and Dupuis families have always been at loggerheads ever since the dissolution of the monasteries, when the defendant's forebear, Bede Fortescue, was the abbot of St. Jude's Abbey, renamed Oak's Lodge, when Henry VIII gave it to Sir Harold's family for services rendered.
In bed. You could talk!
Silence, both of you. And I will not have laughter in court, is that clearly understood? Abbot Bede and the monks having been thrown up.
That is correct.
I see. And what has this potted history to do with Sir Harold's objections to the police?
Well, apparently the families have always preferred to settle their differences between themselves.
Oh, have they?
Duels, my lord. A quick slash, and victor takes all.
And this is the first time they've come to court?
Because of Constable Simpson witnessing the assault.
That is correct.
I see. Then let me state very plainly, Sir Harold, and Mr. Jasper Fortescue, that now that you are in court, you will abide by its procedures. This is a court of law, not a stage for self-indulgent exhibitionism. Is that clear?
Yes, my lord.
Yes, my lord.
Very well, then. You may proceed.
The constable had just arrived, Sir Harold.
Oh, had he? Oh, yes. And seeing me condition, very probably tries to telephone for an ambulance. However, he's forestalled by my wife, who don't approve of doctors.
And what is the defendant doing during this tussle?
He had the impudent gall to seize one end of the rug I'm on and roll me helter-skelter onto the parquet, grabs a damn great flower vase and empties it over the rug, and then starts scubbing off me life's blood.
Now, he showed no contrition for his act of violence.
Well, that'll be the day.
And the constable?
Telephones for a police car and asks them to order an ambulance. Not that Fortescue will leave when it arrives.
Oh, he was resisting arrest.
Refused to budge. And I must say I was only too happy, seeing as how I was wet through and gory to boot.
And how long were you in the hospital?
Not hospital, sir. Never left me own roof, like my father before me, except during the war. So I was hemmed up and hospitalised home.
But you were in bed for some time.
Indeed I was, most incommoded. I've got it here, marked somewhere. Yeah. Difficult to read through the honey.
Honey.
It's a long story, my lord, and it's...
Yes, well, never mind. Could you not remember how many days you were laid up?
Certainly. 5 days and 6 hellish nights.
And I notice you're still limping, Sir Harold.
My leg will not see a horse's flank this side of Middlemass.
So one might say that you are an injured husband in both senses of the word.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Now, Sir Harold, we know that your families have lived side by side for centuries, often apparently at odds. But would you tell the court, as simply as possible, what happened the last time you entered the defendant's garden prior to the incident in which you were wounded?
I had this loudspeaker.
I'm sorry, I didn't phrase my question as clearly as I should have done. Would you tell us first what led up to your entry?
Well, let me see. Late September 74. I remember particularly because I decided to move Pontius Pilate closer home.
Pontius Pilate?
Me gun dog, my lord. Lovely mouth, but inclined to be sidetracked like the original. Anyway, I moved him to a patch by the party wall.
Between your house and the defendant's?
That's right. A friendly beast, a PP, not the defendant. So that way I can wave hello to him in the morning from my bedroom window. Anyway, I moves the dog, the kennel, and the run. Well, of course, the dog, being a dog, lets rip an occasional high-spirited bark. Natural, of course, but...
And what did the defendant do?
Well, he went raving berserk. Screamed over the wall that the dog, with his barks, was stopping his night's ziz. Slept perfectly well myself, of course, but then I have a healthy mind.
And then what happened?
What happened? Oh, well, I refused to move. It was my dog, my kennel, my run, my wire, and that was that. However, late that night, Fortescue, under cover of darkness, and surreptitiously, I might add, secretes a loudspeaker on top of the party wall, just above PP's kennel. Well, it so happened that I was having a good scrub at the ivories when I was riveted to the spot by God Save the Queen, blaring forth what seemed like an eternity. Most unseemly. There I was in my pyjamas, bare feet on the linoleum, rooted to attention, foaming at the mouth, tooth powder coming down me front, and me as cold as a monkey's whatnot. PP didn't take kindly to it either.
And you were naturally angry.
Well, of course I was beside myself with rage. Not only the inconvenience, it was the way he used Her Majesty's tune for his own mealy-mouthed ends. The following morning, I emptied the loudspeaker into his ornamental puddle pond. One speaker the less.
Now, did the defendant see you?
See me? Of course he did. And my wife. Never do anything underhand. Always have been the same.
And where was the defendant?
Skulking in the herbaceous border. Daisy high, so to speak, fiddling about as usual.
And where was your wife?
Straddling on the party wall with me compass. Where else?
What did the accused say to you?
Oh, wasn't so much as say, but scream. If you set one foot on my estate again, I'll have the law on you. I'll run you through the guts. You've massacred my goldfish.
My lord, the mention of goldfish is not as ridiculous as it sounds.
I'm glad to hear it.
The defendant is a world authority on goldfish, and the specimens in his pond cost many hundreds of pounds. I'll run you through the guts. Now, did the defendant's threat sound serious?
Deadly so.
And were those words accompanied by any gesture?
He threatened me with his secateurs, opening and closing them like a jaw. Most distasteful. He even had the effrontery to remind me that his grandfather had decapitated mine during the Boer War.
Just this incident, please, Sir Harold.
Ah, yes. Some things better left buried. Not my grandfather, of course. Yes.
And after this incident in 1974, you have not set foot on the defendant's estate until the evening of the 17th of September, 1976.
Certainly not. Never wanted to.
Now, that must have taken a lot of courage.
Well, I flatter myself that I've never balked when it's a question of my duty. Then there was my poor wife in danger. Moral danger as well as physical, no less.
Very, very commendable. Thank you, Sir Harold.
Not at all, not at all.
Sir Harold, please remain where you were. I've no doubt that the defense counsel, Mr. Crawford White, will wish to cross-examine you.
If you please, my lord. Sir Harold, what is your routine between 5 and 8 o'clock in the evening?
Oh, that's easy. I settles at me desk in the drawing room. And there I stays, pee-pee at me feet, until 8 o'clock, and me pre-dinner noggins. Never vary.
Thank you. Now, in 1975, a year before your knifing, did you have a letter published in the Times?
What's that to you, sir?
Well, that's exactly what I wish to discuss, Sir Harold. A letter in the Times about Gibraltar.
Well, why not? I was stationed there during the war. Gateway to the Med. Heroic times. Happy.
Yes, I see, but...
You haven't been listening to Tommy Mason, have you?
No, Sir Harold, no hearsay. I would just like to read part of your letter. Copies for his lordship and the jury, paragraph number 3, my lord. Having been stationed in gallant Gibraltar in what must have been one of the most trying periods in its glorious history, I feel I can safely say that the loyal natives would rather be hung, drawn and quartered than live under the Spanish flag, and any Englishman who suggests otherwise should be tried for treason and marched through Traitor's Gate. In other words,
be too good for
killed.
them. I said that would be too good for them.
You feel very strongly about the Rock.
Yes, I do. They're British to the core. Even got a boots.
What exactly is that medicine you are taking, Sir Harold?
Brandy, my lord. For me circulation.
Well, really, this is too much. You will hand that flask to the clerk immediately, and it will not be returned to you until you leave this court. If anyone needs to keep a clear head, it is yourself.
Sir Harold, during your wartime service in Gibraltar, is it not true that you hit a guard on the camber of the Admiralty docks merely for suggesting that Gibraltar might one day be returned to Spain?
I was doing my duty, sir.
Really? The man in question was given compensation for a broken jaw, and you were severely reprimanded.
The law's a jackass.
Not always, Sir Harold. Now, I suggest that the day you were knifed, the 17th of September, 1976...
One moment, please. Would it not be possible to quieten some of that noise? We've had quite enough of it in court as it is.
Well, it's caused of the alterations in court number 2.
Yes, I'm well aware of that. Whether the changes will be of any help to the judges, I take leave to doubt.
I'm told the drill won't be used long.
I see. Oh, very well, then we will adjourn. You'll all please be back in this court at 2 o'clock.
Court will stand.
He was in a paddy. I've never seen him as big. I hear they're putting strip lighting over his desk.
At least he's had to have his morning coffee in the corridor. And I know he doesn't like that, I can tell you. Because he's got these, his own china and this fancy crystal sugar. No, let me tell you that if the case continues like it has this morning, he'll make Judge Jeffries seem like Noddy. He will.
The cases in Fulchester are fictitious. Tomorrow you can join us again when the Queen against Fortescue will be resumed in the Crown Court.
In all my years of The Spectator, I've never known more provocation.
Well, what do you expect with all these number 9 hats and no common? I mean, when you think it were their ancestors what caused this law.
Well, that's why there's no respect for it. Familiarity breeding, as it does, contempt.
Off court? Why, a defendant's within an hair's breadth.
It's the sex, Wilf. A great muddier of issues is sex.
Aye, how right you are. And you mark my word, we'll be in the gutter press before this is over. That press box will be overflowing.
And no room in the public's canteen. Cook certainly excelled herself today. Apple crumble as light as a feather duster.
Well, it's the same in our canteen. Court kitchen does for everybody. It's only that we eat separately, that's all.
All right, well, they say we're all the same in the eyes of the law.
Jasper Fortescue, the defendant, is charged with wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm to Vice Admiral Sir Harold Dupuis when Sir Harold entered his library after he had read a letter in the Times written by the defendant. Sir Harold has stated that some years earlier the defendant had threatened to run him through the guts if he ever set foot on his estate again. The jury in today's trial is selected from members of the public.
Is your full name Miss Helga Eloise Weimer?
That is so.
And are you the defendant's housekeeper and do you reside in the defendant's house, Bede Retreat, in the village of St Jude?
That is so.
Now, a week before Sir Harold was wounded by your employer, I believe you served Madeira wine in the library.
That is so. Madeira wine and the sponge fingers at 20 to the 7 o'clock. Punctual.
And who was in the library on that day?
That day. Any day. Mr. Fortescue and her from over the wall.
You mean Lady Dupuis?
That is so.
And what was the defendant saying to Lady Dupuis?
Oh, Mr. Fortescue, I have sworn. Oh, the poor man. He is on his kneeling position, begging that woman to leave her sailor man and to be married to him. And she married already.
And what did Lady Dupuis reply?
She is pulling him on while pushing him back. You know, in her heart, if she has such a thing, which I doubt, up and downing her pretend eyelashes at him, saying that she is married already and that her husband needs her. Who needs her, I say?
And what was Fortescue's reaction?
Mr. Fortescue was quite distracted, and with good reason to be. It was most horrible. Horrible. Him so beautiful in love, and that woman so unworthy of his delicacy.
Miss Viner, you are not here to make derogatory statements about the witness.
I am the truth-telling, the Bible being my oath.
Just so. But you will please stick to the facts only.
Now, the day after this proposal, you were given a letter to post. Now, to whom was that letter addressed?
I remember special because I had to, register it. It was to the Times newspaper. I see Mr. Fortescue's letter when it is in the print, and I am most proud.
The letter suggesting that Gibraltar should be given back to the Spanish.
That is so.
Now, on the day that that letter was published, the day when Sir Harold was wounded, 17th of September 1976, where were you in the evening?
At the Roxy.
Oh, it was your day off?
Oh, that is not so. Mr. Fortescue, he sees my feelings with my friend, Mr. Appleby, and in the goodness of his heart, he sends me off. Is my English not of a good standing?
Oh, quite excellent, Miss Weimer. Now, does he often do such a kind action?
Not often, but not never. Here an evening, there an evening. He is a gentleman.
Or perhaps, Miss Weimer, he wished you out of the house because he'd set a scene for something that he did not wish to be witnessed.
That is not so. That is not so.
Miss Weimer, how long have you worked for Mr. Fortescue?
Work? Who says work? This is a pleasure. 4 years, 7 months, and 3 weeks.
No days?
If you so wish, 5.
Would you say Mr. Fortescue was a man of a passionate nature?
Never. Not even under the torture.
A man of honor where women are concerned?
Eternally. Opening and closing the doors. So graceful.
Then you don't see him taking advantage of a woman?
My God, upside down they have it. Women coming into our house from everywhere. Everywhere. And him trapped like a bird in a cage, and that woman, she is the worst, tying him up in a parcel on her whims and roundabouts. How I have suffered for him, only my mother knows that she is dead. Meine arme Mutter ist tot, und ich bin jetzt ganz allein mit ihm und jener Frau.
Approximately 6:45 p.m. on the 17th of September 1976, I am at the entrance to Mr. Fortescue's estate.
Do you see him in the court?
Yes, sir, he's in the dock. To Mr. Fortescue's estate with a book of raffle tickets for the police ball, when I hear a screaming coming from the defendant's library. I therefore proceed to the French window.
Excuse me, Constable Simpson. How long did this take you?
Well, now, my lord, I were admiring Mrs. Miniver.
I presume you mean the rose.
That's right, my lord. I remember most particularly because my own had not flourished. So I set off at a smart pace past the laburnum, cutting across the lawn through the sweet-scented stocks and dwarf pinks, and through the Daphne Laureola by the French windows. I couldn't have been more than 20 seconds.
I see, thank you.
I then see Sir Harold just inside the windows. He must have entered at that second, sir, because the windows were still all of a quiver. What's going on here, I say? As Sir Harold falls, revealing Mr. Fortescue facing him with a dagger in his right hand.
Is that the dagger?
Yes, sir, that's it.
Please, continue.
The defendant looks down at Sir Harold and shouts, "Felix Culper, it's good to see you bite the dust."
Just a minute. Who?
Felix Culper, my lord.
Who's he?
Well, I don't know, my lord. I'm sure.
Another cul-de-sac we shall be forced to explore and continue.
And where was Lady Dupuis?
Well, towards the back of the room, sir. You see, when Sir Harold fell, her ladyship was holding some bulrushes in front of her person, and she sort of chucks them in the air, and they all go scattering over Sir Harold. She must have been terribly upset, poor lady, because she's still shouting. Anyway, seeing as the Admiral was wounded, I go and phone for an ambulance. And I'm hampered by her ladyship, who says, "I'll not have him tinkered with by them. I never did trust White." To which Sir Harold replies, "And I'll not have your herbal cures on my shank." And Lady Dupuis screams again, very strong it was, "Reject my herbs, and you reject me." She then mumbled something about vessel virgins.
I think you mean Vestal virgins.
Oh, do I? Oh, thank you, sir.
Please, continue.
I then hold her ladyship back with one hand and with the other phone for the panda and ask them to send an ambulance, at which moment she points at the defendant and shouts, "Murderer, murderer." He doesn't react, sir. He just scrambles about examining the rug under Sir Harold, who is being rolled off by the defendant. I try to stop him, sir, but do not manage to do so.
Was he violent with you?
Well, he more besides himself, my lord. You see, I were afeard of trampling on Sir Harold, who's thrashing about in the bulrush is something terrible. The defendant then picks up a vase of water and pours it over Sir Harold and the rug, which he then commences to clean. I then attempt to catch his ear. Yeah, well, there was a lot of noise from the wireless and everything. I informed him that I was arresting him for grievous bodily harm and cautioned him, to which he replied, "And who asked you in? This is not a public toilet."
Lavatory, ma'am. The word is lavatory.
Fortescue, I have already cautioned you twice before. One more word and you will find yourself in serious trouble. Please continue.
This is not a public toilet lavatory. Come to think of it, at least they charge a penny. And he holds out his hands to make his point.
And when the police car arrived, you took him to the station?
Well, in the end, sir.
Oh, he was resisting arrest.
Well, we couldn't get him parted from the rug, sir. And it was too big to bundle him with it, though we did try. He keeps on repeating, "If Cleopatra can travel in one, why can't I?"
And where was Lady Dupuis during... Where was she?
Well, my lord, after she debated and allowed me to turn off the wireless, she shouts at Sir Harold, lying on the stretcher, "You had your chance to return to favour, and now you've muffed it. I will have my herb garden."
Did you suggest she accompany her husband?
Well, indeed, yes, my lord. But she refused. She just gathered the bulrushes together and arranged them in a vase. She was singing, "We'll gather lilacs." Well, I were a bit out of my depth, my lord.
I'm not at all surprised.
I've no more questions, my lord.
Constable Simpson, you said in your statement about Lady Dupuis, then she points at the defendant and shouts, "Murderer, murderer."
Yes, that is so, sir.
How did you know she was pointing at the defendant?
Well, I don't quite understand you, sir. I mean, she was...
Yes, but at whom? You've already stated he doesn't react, just examines the rug under Sir Harold.
Oh, well now, so the defendant has just knifed Sir Harold.
In other words, you were assuming that Lady Dupuis was referring to Mr. Fortescue in the same way that you assumed that Mr. Fortescue had used the word toilet instead of the word lavatory. With Mr. Fortescue's background and education, it is quite inconceivable that he would have used the word toilet, a word in his social circles which is quite unacceptable.
Well, I don't know, I'm sure.
Then you should know, considering it was what the defendant said after being cautioned.
Well, it's all very muddled, sir.
I must say Constable Simpson has my sympathy.
I call Jasper Fortescue.
What is your religion?
Roman Catholic.
Would you hold the book, the Bible, in your right hand and repeat the words on the card?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Is your full name Jasper Bede Avrion Quentin Fortescue?
Yes, Geoffrey, it is.
And do you live at Bede Retreat in the village of St. Jude?
Yes, I do.
And what is your relationship with Lady Dupuis?
Of course, I'm dedicated to her, a lady of truly divine sensibility. In fact, I'm quite sure that eventually we shall be united. But of course, I would not dream of attempting to achieve this blissful state by killing her husband. That would taint the purity of our relationship.
Then you would not deliberately wound Sir Harold?
Certainly not. I'm a vegetarian.
What has that got to do with it?
Everything, my lord. If one does not approve the killing of animals of the field and birds of the air, well, then how much more must one deplore the killing of a man? Not that he's innocent, far from it.
In other words, you hope that one day Lady Dupuis may obtain a divorce so that you might marry her.
Ah, well, that would, of course, be sublime. But I would be more than content to live with the lady in what the world chooses to call sin.
Proof, my lord, that he dragged her into the dust.
Silence in court.
You are a cancer, a seducer of women.
Silence in court.
You should be horsewhipped, deported abroad.
In court.
Now let us take the incidents leading up to the wounding in their chronological order. In the autumn of 1974, Sir Harold moved his gun dog, Pontius Pilate, from a perfectly good run out of your hearing to the party wall where its incessant barking kept you awake most of the night.
A deliberate act of menace against myself and Lady Dupuis. I mean, after all, that was the exact spot where she had wanted to plant her medicinal herb garden.
Ah, yes. Now, because Sir Harold refused to move his dog, you placed a loudspeaker on the wall and played God Save the Queen, but only to demonstrate to him how irritating noise can be. It was a purely practical demonstration, was it not?
Exactly. A beautiful stroke, embracing, as it did, poetic justice.
And it was the next morning that Sir Harold threw the loudspeaker into your goldfish pond, and this was when you were said to utter your so-called threat.
Yes, but it wasn't the speaker, you understand. It was my beautiful goldfish. Poor innocent creatures going about their business, swimming, spawning, doing harm to no one. They were, you know, the red Chinese carp, which have always been cherished for ornament. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Except, of course, to a homicidal maniac.
I am becoming increasingly tired of warning this court about pejorative statements. One more remark like that, and you will find yourself in serious trouble. Is that clearly understood?
Yes, my lord.
Continue.
Mr. Fortescue.
Yes, Geoffrey.
Mr. Fortescue, what did Sir Harold then say to you?
Well, I can't remember the exact wording.
Well, perhaps you could give us the precise meaning.
Well, I said something like, Never set foot here again. You have massacred my goldfish. And I might well have added, I'll have your guts for garters. A quaint peasant expression I sometimes use, my lord.
But you at no time threatened Sir Harold's life.
Certainly not.
And now to the evening of the 17th of September 1976. Where were you at approximately 6:45 p.m.?
In my library. You see, Lady Dupuis and I had fallen into the delightful habit of meeting at dusk, between 6 and 8. The witching hour, as she so charmingly calls it. Her metaphors are always charming. And I would be working, you see, at my gros point. On this occasion, a rather charming conceit of the Fortescue arms, surmounted by our motto, Aut Caesar, aut nihil, which I sometimes say might be roughly translated as emperor or bust.
And Lady Dupuis?
Ah, well, of course, she was attending to the niceties of our surroundings. She has a wonderfully true eye. She would perhaps be doing a little flower arranging, occasionally breaking into song. And then at 20 to 7 au point, the estimable Fräulein Weimer would bring in the Madeira wine. In good time, you see, for our friends the Archers.
It sounds a very peaceful scene.
Oh, it was quite idyllic. We're both very, very fond of Dan Archer, one of nature's gentlemen. You know, Ruskin has something
And did you, in this idyllic scene on the 17th of September 1976, threaten Lady Dupuis with your dagger? Please show the defendant exhibit number 1.
Oh, yes, that's the chap. An exquisite example of Florentine work. Early 18th century, I should say, though, of course, I could be wrong. No, but as for threatening the dear lady with it, I mean, the idea is obscene. Quite obscene.
But Sir Harold says that he heard you say, Dotty, I'll have my way, you'll see.
As if I would rape her during the Archers.
And what about after the Archers?
Rape is not part of my repertoire.
That's a relief. Please continue.
Anyhow, what I said was, I'll have it my way, yellow and sweet pea. Referring, of course, to shades of wool, which Lady Dupuis felt might clash.
And was Lady Dupuis protecting herself with wool rushing?
The very idea. She was about to start on one of her unique arrangements. She really is remarkable. She can do wonders, you know, with an old calendar and a handful of twigs.
Now, would you now describe how your peace was disturbed?
Well, now, Dan was talking to his amiable wife, Doris, about Walter Gabriel's garden furniture project. And then quite suddenly this extraordinary banging started up behind me. Dotty started to scream. Utterly astonished, I wheeled round on my stool, and there was a demented form of Sir Harold, shouting and rattling the window handles like a raving lunatic. Well, naturally, I rushed across the room to lock him out. I mean, he really did look very dangerous. But at that moment, the doors burst open. He came bursting in like a flying saucer and straight onto my dagger.
But why were you holding such a weapon in the first place?
I was cutting my magenta.
Your what?
Magenta wool, my lord. It must be cut into manipulative lengths, you see. On this occasion, I was working on a rather charming deadly nightshade, which has a very devious petal.
And then what happened?
Well, then Constable Simpson was upon us.
Ah, yes, Constable Simpson. Now, he has stated that you said, Felix Culper, it's good to see you bite the dust.
The man's a fool.
Which man?
Well, our rustic constable, my lord, the salt of the earth and all that, but still a fool. I mean, everybody knows it was St. Augustine who said Felix Culpa.
Well, for those of us who are not as learned as yourself, perhaps you would translate it.
Well, I should have thought that was a matter of universal knowledge. However, it is, of course, Latin, and it means a happy mistake. You see, Sir Harold had thrown himself onto my dagger, which I was unaware that I was still holding. It's not every day of the week that a mad admiral bursts in on one's soiree, but as he was not severely wounded, rather less than he deserved, in my opinion, why then, you see, it was a happy mistake.
So once you were sure that Sir Harold was not dangerously wounded, you then turned your attention to the rug.
It's the most natural thing in the world. I mean, that has won more prizes than he's sunk battleships.
I have no more questions, Lord.
Mr. Fortescue, in your statement to Mr. Geoffrey Crawford White, you said, and I quote, I now know his maniacal views on that, meaning Gibraltar.
Yes, that's correct.
But is it? Surely you read Sir Harold's letter when it was printed.
Yeah, I might have done, then again I might not.
Mr. Fortescue, over the years you've become a minor celebrity for your many offbeat and extremely witty letters in the Times.
It's very civil of you.
So you must have read this letter.
Well, I suppose, as I recall it now, I suppose I must have read it. But until the incident, I have no idea how madly unhinged he was on the subject.
Now, I really can't accept that. The man you've quarrelled with all your life, the family that your family have feuded with for over 300 years, in fact, I suggest that any opinion of his would have registered very clearly.
If you say so.
Indeed, I do say so. Now, this registered letter you sent to the Times suggesting that Gibraltar be given back to the Spanish. Why did you send it?
Why? Why on earth shouldn't I?
More specifically, why did you send it immediately after Lady Dupuis had turned down your proposal of marriage?
It's as good a time as any other.
Better, I would have thought. After all, you knew that Sir Harold felt very strongly about Gibraltar, so what better than to send a letter so inflammatory to Sir Harold that he would break his 2-year silence and dash round to your house to have it out with you face to face, and
yes,
not...
But who is to say that it's going to be published?
Oh, there was an odds-on chance.
Well, you're very kind, but really I still don't understand.
Now, I think you understand very well. Sir Harold had not set foot on your estate since the goldfish incident. In other words, since the time when you and his wife began your affair.
How dare you besmirch our relationship with your smutty implications?
Mr. Fortescue, you will please address counsel in a seemly manner.
But, my lord, is he to be allowed to make remarks that might taint the reputation of an innocent woman?
He is to be allowed by me to say anything that is relevant to the issue. And you may be sure, if he oversteps the bounds of cross-examination, he will be stopped immediately. Is that clearly understood?
My lord.
Thank you, my lord. Now, by forcing a confrontation with the underhand method of fanning Sir Harold's hatred of the Spanish government, you had hoped he would be faced with a picture of yourself and his wife together in a scene of domestic bliss. He would then be forced to recognize his wife's relationship with yourself, and from pride, if nothing else, would have turned her out of his house, thus creating the very situation you wish to bring about.
How dare you malign a lady of impeccable honour and utter simplicity? You, sir, are a rotter. Under any other circumstances, I would call you out.
I call Lady Dupuis.
The cases in Fulchester are fictitious. Tomorrow you can join us again when the Queen against Fortescue will be concluded in the Crown Court. Sir Harold Dupuis is alleged that he was stabbed by his neighbour Jasper Fortescue, and as a consequence, Fortescue is on trial for wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Dupuis claimed that the incident occurred on the 17th of September 1976, when, angered by a letter in the Times which Fortescue had written, he went to Fortescue's house, and there found Fortescue and Lady Dupuis together.
I call Lady Dupuis.
The jury is selected from members of the public.
Call Lady Dupuis.
I do apologise, my lord. I hadn't realised that you were upon me. Before you ask, I am pagan. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Lady Dupuis, would you please tell the court what the nature of your relationship with the defendant, Mr. Fortescue, is?
The past tense, if you would be so kind, was, not is. Since the bloodletting, but before then, oh, most tender. We were soulmates until the small unpleasantness in the library.
Now, this relationship with Mr. Fortescue...
You need to be coy, dear boy. I'm sure the word sex was on the tip of your clever tongue. After all, it is one of the more joyous mysteries of this planet, so there's no need to be timid. Of course we enjoyed sexual relationship, relished it with some abandon, I might add, but in the mind only. You understand?
And how long have you been friendly with the defendant?
Let me see, since 74, when my late husband...
Just one moment. This is the first we've heard of a previous marriage. When did you marry Sir Harold?
We married to celebrate the Festival of Britain, 1951. In fact, we should have had our silver jubilee last year. Perhaps I should explain.
I think perhaps you'd better.
In 74, the spirits led me to an extraordinary book called Nature Knows All. It was here that I learned that if I planted certain herbs at a given angle to the stars, boiled them up and quaffed them down, why, then the benign influences of the celestial bodies would cure my own. Well, naturally, I set to with compass and ruler. I'm a bit of a dud at geometry, but I had a go by the party wall, in the very spot where Sir Harold moved his horrible hand. He did it quite deliberately. Typical Scorpio. And do you know what he said to me?
I can't imagine.
He said, Dotty, if you must plant your bits, then shove them in the herb garden with the mint. I have not communicated with him since. He never wanted me cured. He wished me dead. And so in his eyes, dead I am. And he is dead to me.
Lady Dupuis, I've listened with commendable patience, and I am here to tell you we are not present to play games of semantics.
Oh, you do surprise me. I had imagined that the law was based on semantics. The Greek word, semantikos, meaning significant. I must say, I find it quite refreshingly naive if you consider the law is not semantic. We live and we learn.
You understand me very well, and you will bear that in mind when giving your evidence. Is that clearly understood?
Certainly, my lord. Though I would like to make comment on the joy of your fine, vibrant voice.
You are not here to make any comments, however agreeable. Will you please just answer the questions?
If that is your pleasure, my lord.
It is, Lady Dupuis. Please continue, Mr. Crawford White.
And when precisely did you meet the defendant, Mr. Fortescue?
After the massacre of the goldfish. So suitable. We're both Pisces.
In fact, it was in the autumn of 1974.
I think I can pinpoint the date more precisely. It was the full moon. I remember thinking how auspicious this was for a vibrant relationship.
And did you keep this relationship with Mr. Fortescue a secret from Sir Harold?
I don't slink, if that's what you're implying.
Let me put it another way, then. Do you think Sir Harold knew of your relationship with the defendant?
Who can tell except the stars? He's a strange and unpredictable man. I mean, he dotes on blancmange and loathes jelly. Where's the difference there?
Lady Dupuis, were you not very careful to conceal from Sir Harold your clandestine meetings? Otherwise, why else would you have chosen the witching hour, 6 o'clock, when you knew that Sir Harold would be shut in his drawing room, never to emerge until 8 o'clock?
That's his problem, silly boy. The times I've told him that routine is the canker of the soul. Mind you, if he had known, he would never dared to have stopped me, with or without the forces.
The forces?
The spirits. Ever present to protect their own, even here. Come to think of it, more than ever here.
Is it not right, Lady Dupuis, that there is a thick shrubbery between the two houses, so that it would have been quite impossible for Sir Harold to have seen you when you approached Mr. Fortescue's house?
How very perceptive of you, that is right.
But what about the party wall?
That is 9 feet high, my lord, and needs steps to clear, as I know to my cost.
But surely Sir Harold could have seen you from an upstairs window.
Happily, there are no windows overlooking the front garden. Or rather, there were, until Cuthbert Dupuis had them bunged up to cut off the offending view of enemy territory.
It is unbelievable.
In fact, Lady Dupuis, when Sir Harold stated that he did not know of your relationship until the fateful evening of September the 17th, he may have been telling the truth.
And one man's truth is another man's tool. You have only to contemplate Cromwell.
Lady Dupuis, I believe that you were with Sir Harold in Gibraltar. In fact, I believe you met him there.
Spirited times. I was in the Wrens on deadly hush-hush, no less. I wore a tin hat.
And I believe that Sir Harold was something of a joke for his pride in the rock remaining British.
Oh, my lord.
Mr. Crawford White, that question is out of order, as you very well know.
I do apologise, my lord.
Do please enlighten me.
I will not have a man's values derided, even though they may appear old-fashioned to some people.
Charming.
I do apologise, my lord.
Well, just see that it does not happen again.
Yes, my lord. I would now like to ask you about Mr. Fortescue's threat in the autumn of 1974. We have already heard how Sir Harold moved his gun dog to the party wall, and how Mr. Fortescue couldn't sleep because of the barking. How, to demonstrate how irritating noise can be, he then placed a loudspeaker on the wall and played God Save the Queen, and how Sir Harold then threw the loudspeaker into Mr. Fortescue's goldfish pond. Now, were you a witness to this incident?
I had a ringside seat. Do so enjoy a bit of gutsy horseplay.
Now, please think very carefully before you answer my next question. What did Mr. Fortescue say to Sir Harold?
Well, I cannot remember verbatim, from the Latin verbum meaning word. But the meaning was, don't set foot here again. You've no guts if you kill goldfish.
Then he did not threaten Sir Harold's life.
Larks away, no. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Really? Now to return to the evening of the 17th of September 1976, Constable Simpson has stated that he heard you screaming from the defendant's library. Now, why was that?
I should have thought it was perfectly obvious. I saw a black man peering at me through the foliage. Rolling his eyes at me, he was. Now, please do not misconstrue my meaning. I have no racial prejudice per se. It is just that it was not a familiar sight in Forty's laurels. Notting Hill Gate, perhaps. The black and white minstrel show, inevitably, but not there.
A black man?
Indeed. Sir Harold. Mucky pup. He had dirt from the leaves all over his face. He always attracted bits like crushed velvet. I mean, look at the honey.
Why, then, did you continue to scream?
It is my wont.
Then it was not the defendant who frightened you.
40? Good gracious, no. He couldn't frighten pussy.
And he did not threaten you with a knife?
He would never be so bold.
How did Sir Harold enter the library?
How should I know? He was just there, like a cloudburst. He never made a graceful entrance in his life, even at our wedding. He tripped over his dress sword and fell under my train.
Did you see Sir Harold when he sustained his wound?
I saw pulsating red auras, and that was quite blood-curdling enough. Thank you very much.
Were you not looking in Sir Harold's direction?
I was looking at the ceiling. Where else? I might add that I always look away, spiritually, of course, when confronted by sordidity. I mean, I saw this extraordinary black face, and I immediately raised my eyes to higher things. In this case, an exquisite ceiling, fair sagging with putti.
Putti?
The plural of puto, my lord. Italian, meaning naked boys, as in Cupid.
And when did you lower your eyes?
After Sir Harold was spread-eagled, when I heard Constable Simpson's resonant tones. I do so love a genuine burr. Country accents give one such a sense of identity, don't you agree?
Lady Dupuis, did you have no feelings for your husband's injury?
It is his soul that concerns me, my lord, and that is a full-time occupation, I can tell you. After all, he's had dozens of legs in other lives. But his soul, you can't get a spare for that.
To whom, then, were you pointing when you shouted murderer?
To no one in particular. I mean, the library was awash with violent vibrations. Sir Harold wishing me dead, 40 dithering about with a blood-stained dagger. Murderer seemed to me to be the only sane comment, and it still does. From then onwards, I cut myself adrift on the ocean of higher thoughts. Dear Ivor Novello.
Lady Dupuis, I believe one of your many hobbies is composing crossword puzzles.
Indeed it is, my speciality being in the Latin. It is a gentle sport that harms no one.
Oh, I quite agree with you. However, your apparent vagueness as to what people have said could directly harm the course of justice.
Surely you mean the law. The two are not synonymous.
From the Greek word suno pneumon, meaning name.
Bravo!
So let us more accurately name the actual words used when the defendant threatened your husband. I believe you said that the defendant's meaning was, don't set foot here again, you've no guts if you massacre goldfish.
Something like that.
Oh, well then it could equally well have been, if ever you put so much as 1 foot on my estate again, I'll run you through the guts, you've massacred my goldfish.
No, that is quite inaccurate. The sentence is too long.
Oh, so it's the length you query, not the changed sense.
On the contrary, the length can change the sense, as you very well know.
The length can change the sense. So, if he had said, don't set foot here again or I'll run you through the guts, that would have been acceptable.
I distinctly remember the word massacre, so that is inaccurate. Try again.
Indeed I will, as massacre was not in your original statement. Now, do you remember the words foot, gut, massacre and fish?
Distinctly.
And do you remember the exact order in which they were put?
I've said not offhand.
But we're not talking offhand. You've sworn to tell the truth, which does not mean an approximation of it. Indeed, I put it to you that you remember certain words in the threat and that you arrange them in your mind as you saw fit, as you might arrange the words in a crossword puzzle.
How dare you browbeat my wife? Poor delicate
I quite agree, it is a disgrace!
Dupuis, Fortescue, sit down and be quiet. Now then, no one is allowed to browbeat anyone in this court. But they are allowed, indeed encouraged, to pin down an elusive witness on the accuracy of their statements. And I am quite sure that Lady Dupuis is perfectly capable of sustaining questions from prosecuting counsel.
Flatterer?
Thank you, my lord. Now, bearing in mind what I've said about your attitude to words, let's turn to the defendant's library on the evening of the 17th of September 1976, when you shouted murderer. When you shouted murderer, your husband was lying on the rug with a deep gash in his thigh, and Fortescue was standing over him with a bloody knife. Now, that's a very dramatic picture. Now, I put it to you that when you shouted murderer, it was at the defendant.
Oh dear, I've said I shouted murderer at both of them.
Do you love the defendant?
No, not really. Viewed from here, he looks a bit silly. But I could always change my mind.
Do you love your husband, then? Even your late husband?
I know him. Not in the biblical sense, of course. But he could be maddeningly likable.
But you care for what he does, what he thinks of you.
From time to time. But then, of course, time is relative.
But you care enough to get at him and to get him boiling.
He does the same.
But not as a game, and that is the difference. Now, I suggest to you that you did point at the defendant and you quite fairly shouted murderer. Then, when you discovered your husband was only wounded, you used this spontaneous cry to have revenge on him for not taking your herbal medicine seriously. After all, Sir Harold has stated that when he entered, you shouted, you care, you care.
It was stirring stuff.
Why did you so forcibly try and stop Constable Simpson for telephoning for an ambulance?
Oh, goodness gracious, I thought we'd been into all that. To me, our living bodies are pulsing seas, though tideless. Shakespeare got it quite wrong.
Now, I suggest to you that when you stopped the constable for telephoning for an ambulance, there was an extra and a more important reason than the one you stated. I suggest that you saw the wound, and you then realised there might be official proceedings, and you attempted to protect the defendant.
And why should I try to protect Fawlty more than Sir Harold? Answer me that.
Quite simply. Fortescue is on trial, and he may be sent to jail, no less. But your husband is not. And you don't care how much you twist the evidence, so long as you remain at the centre, manipulating the two men in your life for your own egotistical satisfaction. But if he does go to jail, you are no longer in control. You can no longer play one man off against the other. Lady Dupuis, I suggest to you that you are a very dangerous and a very amoral woman.
Ah, dangerous I may be. In fact, I'm inclined to agree with you. Since my earliest days, I have been a catalyst, though both Sir Harold and Fawlty have told me that I am fun. Rampageous, glorious fun. However, I most forcibly disagree with the word amoral, Far too wishy-washy. Now, if you had said immoral, that's quite a different kettle. I have always been a woman of ungovernable passion, and both my boys will agree with me. A femme fatale, no less. How's that?
Now, you've heard from the defendant's housekeeper how Fortescue was turned down by Lady Dupuis and of how he was extremely upset by it. How the very next day he sent a registered letter to the Times, a letter so inflammatory that Sir Harold was certain to break his 2-year silence and to go to Bede Retreat to have it out with the defendant. You've also heard that only the day before the wounding, Fortescue happened to lose his scissors and replaced them with a dagger. How on the day of the wounding, Fortescue was sitting in his library with Sir Harold's wife, and at the judged moment when he could expect Sir Harold to appear, he was sitting facing Lady Dupuis with a knife in his hand. Now, the defendant must have known that Sir Harold would come sometime after 6 p.m. And yet he has stated that he was utterly astonished when he heard a noise behind him at 6:45. Now, is that possible? Or is it not much more likely that he lied? And if so, there was only one motive for his lie. And you must bear in mind that at no time had Fortescue warned Lady Dupuis to stay away. Of course he didn't. Because the scene of cosy domesticity that Sir Harold was to witness was preconceived. A scene set so carefully that Sir Harold would be driven to force an entry into the library, and then the defendant would have an excuse to kill him so that he would be free to marry Lady Dupuis, or at the very least, to wound him, in revenge for the affection he was still held in by his wife. In other words, he wounded Sir Harold with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Now, you may feel that Lady Dupuis was the cause of this incident, but that's not what you're here to decide.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have seen Sir Harold in the witness box, and you have seen how passionately he feels about Gibraltar remaining British. How, during the last war, he injured a man for merely suggesting that one day Gibraltar might be returned to Spain. You have also seen how passionately he loves his wife, who in his eyes can do no wrong. Imagine then the scene that confronted him when he rushed round to Mr. Fortescue's library after having read his letter in the Times. He is already furious. He peers through the laurels and sees his beloved wife with the man whom he hates, who appears to be threatening her with a dagger. Now imagine the feelings of the defendant on seeing Sir Harold standing there, shaking the doors in an angry and threatening manner. What more sensible than that the defendant jumps up to lock those doors against the intruder? What more understandable than that he forgets that he has a dagger in his hand for cutting his wool? But too late. Sir Harold has fallen into the room and onto the dagger. A terrible accident, but an accident, no less.
You may think it's high time that Sir Harold Dupuis, the defendant Fortescue, and not least Lady Dupuis, saw their childish behaviour in its true light and made up their historic quarrels once and for all. Sitting here listening to this case, you may have come to the conclusion that these three people need each other as much as they profess to hate each other, and that if they did not live next door to each other, all the colour and interest would go out of their lives. But of course that is not what you're concerned with.
Will the foreman of the jury please stand? Have you reached a verdict upon which you're all agreed? Please answer yes or no.
Yes.
What is your verdict? Please answer guilty or not guilty.
Not guilty.
Very well, you may go.
Thank God that's over.
Oh, no, it isn't, you know.
What do you mean, Mr. Queen?
Well, I've got a taste for it now. They'll be taking each other to court as regularly as winter follows summer.
Oh, God help the judge.
Oh, God.